It's time for the Bookie and the Better Show. If you're a sports fan, now it's time to play the odds and make every bet count. New episodes post every Thursday on your favorite streaming service. Now introducing Rob Kowalski, the Bookie, and Randy White, the Better.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Bookie and Better podcast and YouTube episode. I'm your host, Robert Kowalski, joined by my long-time friend, Josh Nagel. Josh, welcome back to the show. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, Robert, thanks for having me, man. It's always an honor to join you. And like you mentioned, we go back many years sort of in this realm, but we don't catch up that often anymore, so I'm happy to be here.
I know, and it's as if, when you take a look back, I mean, yeah, it's definitely more than 10 years. If I remember how far back I got to meet you actually back at the Calneva. On Fridays, actually, we were sitting at the old table doing an episode together right on the same day. So, here we are doing it in just a different medium. That's all it is.
That's right. And you're right. If you want to do the exact day, I want to say, 2011, 12. We go back quite a ways now. It's funny how the time flies, as they say.
Well, I'm very grateful for having Josh on today. Randy and Nick, our usual suspects, are not present today, but I'm very, very thrilled to have Josh here. Of course, our senior analyst from CBS Sportsline. All things from a pro college. Josh, you've probably, I'm not going to even say probably. If I need a source from a college football perspective, I only know I need to make one phone call, and it's to Josh. And what better way to break down what actually happened in day one of the NFL draft than to have Josh here and talk. What I want to do is take a look at the NFL teams that have drafted a quarterback in the first round. And take a look at them from a betting perspective. Easiest way for me to actually look at it, the way I was peering at it, was my numbers came out for the season win totals about a month ago. I thought the numbers were pretty solid. I don't know if they're going to hold up after round one, and that's why Josh is here to see if he could go ahead and spear a couple through and let me know if they've improved or not. But we're going to go ahead and take a look at that. And so, Josh, I go ahead and have a look basically from the very first pick of the round one, the Chicago Bears. The Chicago Bears, for the longest time after trading away Justin Fields, everyone thought it was going to be Caleb Williams. The number was whatever you wanted it to be to the minus. It was basically already a signed deal. And so Caleb Williams was the first overall pick. Chicago Bears added some pieces, obviously, before the draft happened. How do you think they are going to look now that they have, and I know we're going to get to what they did about 8 or 9 picks later, but tell me, what do you think about what does Chicago look like now, minus Justin Fields, adding Caleb Williams to the roster?
Yeah, Robert, well, as you mentioned, it's one of those things where he appears to be enough of a potential generational talent that you couldn't possibly pass on him, right? There's just no getting away from that if you passed on him and he became a Hall of Famer. So the Bears, pretty much had to do that, but I thought it was interesting that some would argue that Justin Fields, was he ever given truly a fair shot? That's a moot point by now. They moved on, they gave him a few years, but there's times, especially late last year, the Bears had a strong, surge to end the season and maybe lent some hope that they could do something with them, but they move forward in a new era. I'll be honest with you, to me, it's tough to gauge this whole draft class. It's not unlike 2021 where it's funny, where it was a high percentage of busts in that quarterback draft class. I'm not sure about this one. Like, you watch him on tape and I feel like, you cannot deny he makes all the plays. He's super dynamic. However, you want to make just a quick comparison to his USC fellow alum Sam Darnold, who Caleb Williams, don't get me wrong, has much more the dramatic talent and everything you're looking for. Even regardless, Sam Darnold was a top 3 draft pick. But to me, they had sort of a similar trajectory as it went on. He won the Heisman, everything was going great. But last year, especially against the upper tier competition, he didn't play so well. Similar to when Sam Darnold faced the likes of Notre Dame and Ohio State. Suddenly, he couldn't do much of anything. He was rolling up huge numbers on Oregon State, but not the real top tier opponents. And Caleb Williams, we saw last year, USC offense wasn't the problem. Their defense gave up a lot of plays, and therefore they had a somewhat mediocre season. But the way he reacted to it, to me, it wasn't the greatest look, right? Both his body language and leadership seemed to be something that could legitimately be questioned because he didn't seem to show a lot of poise there. But again, they had no choice but to take him. And again, with who they just added, you mentioned the Keenan Allen. Before even the draft happened, they tried to surround him with some extra weapons, and we'll see how that goes for him. But I'm sure based on that alone, you mentioned the future markets. I think we're waiting to see how everything settles, because I think this was so anticipated that actually what happened last night didn't change it much, but I'm curious to see what happens after the draft.
So it is, as we're listening here and we're recording, and obviously you'll be hearing this not too long after we hit the send button. I've got a feeling that if we take a look at the timestamp and where we're at, we know what happened in the first round, and this is all we're dealing with right now, Josh. Shortly after the pick of Caleb Williams, they pick up Washington's Rome Odunze. And I thought that, man, okay, I need to contact my friends, specifically Rob, I'm speaking to you, who now lives in Illinois and has adopted a Bears fandom, so to say. Odunze, Allen, Moore, obviously, there's a vast improvement year over year. 8.5, the season win total, pretty much right there at 500. Josh, up or down?
On first blush, I would say, it's a really tough one. I think the line is made perfectly, but like you mentioned, especially now with the 17-game season that the NFL has, that just sort of hinges. That's a yes, no. Do the Bears have a respectable / winning season? And given how their defense came on last year, it's funny, people realize that over the last, I think, 6 weeks of the season, they had the top-rated, scoring defense in the NFL. They pick up where they left off and get some production, 9 wins, but still going against divisional Packers are on the upswing, and you never know how
the whole division.
So it could be a tough one. So right now, I would go over by a bet. I would, unload any significant amount of, bankroll on taking that specific bet. But you ask for an initial lean, I would say 9 and 8 seems reasonable.
Okay. It's the over of 8.5. Very nice. Very nice. That'll wrap up the Chicago Bears. Josh will take over just by a smidge, the 8.5 season win total. And so a great little opportunity there as we're listening here on what we're talking about, NFL Draft Day, round number 1. From a betting perspective, at least for season win totals. Not something that we typically delve into as the future pools, but this one very specifically dovetails very well with what we just saw in front of everybody at Detroit, where they had the draft last night. So the next pick went to the Washington Commanders, and here's a situation where a lot of chatter. It just shows you, Josh, no one knows anything. Everyone was like, maybe they draft out. No. Jaden Daniels, LSU, is now a Commander. Improvement, or do we see a little bit of a tail off, perhaps? I mean, I don't think that we're going to see anyone but Jaden Daniels on week number 1's first snap. Do you think?
No, I think you're right. And it's funny how they chose to kind of go in a different direction after sort of rushing, Sam Howell into the lineup last year, a 5th-round pick who probably wasn't necessarily ready to start, but for what it's worth, right? I think he's in Seattle now. It was a bad look. I mean, they had terrible offensive protection, but it's kind of funny. Like Howell, if you go back, he basically led the league in everything, everything bad. I mean, interceptions, sacks taken, everything. But he also led the league in passing yards. It was the most bizarre stat line you've ever seen, because he'd throw for 450 yards, 3 interceptions, 8 sacks taken, and had some of the most bizarre stat lines ever. But you're right. So they decided, okay, we're going to kind of wipe the slate clean, and instead of taking his, fellow, North Carolina alum Drake May, which there was speculation, they took Daniels. Guy had a long college career. Remember, he started off at Arizona State, and he looked really athletic but kind of erratic. Fell into a groove there at LSU, and it's hard to deny some of the numbers he put up are off the charts. LSU scoring 50 points a game. Obviously, as we also saw, he had 2 first-round receivers with him, and he made a ton of plays. Yep. But you're right. So that dynamic, dual threat college guy, it doesn't translate. As you mentioned, I think all 6-round, first-round quarterbacks, as you mentioned, is sort of a huge glaring question mark with all of them. But I agree with you. I think for sure he's their guy for opening day.
So, okay, and this is great because obviously situation, everything is where it all lands, right? So obviously you put Jaden Daniels on Chicago versus Washington, we could probably have a different outlook on Jaden Daniels. Not to put everything on his shoulders, but this is a show about quarterbacks today. Josh, the Washington Commanders season win total was 6.5. Yes, we know what division they're in. We know where they're probably going to sit. Over or under 6.5 now with Jaden Daniels.
At this point, I think you got to go under. Yes. Because there's so much wrong, Robert, with that franchise. It's a perpetual rebuilding state. I can't imagine. Because, again, to bet the over, for them, 7 wins would be more than respectable. I think that would be overachieving. But especially when you mentioned, we know the Eagles had their problems at the end of last year, but they're sort of restocking and rebuilding. They should be all right. And Dallas lost some key players. But regardless of all that, Washington should still be the worst team in the NFC East. It's hard to see them springing too many upsets in other games. So even if they do build a decent core from the draft, I would take the under.
Wait, you're telling me that Big Blue won't finish dead last in my division? Am I getting hope that I'm not going to finish last?
Robert, what I think is funny with the Giants is look at their trajectory. To me, it was like 2 extreme years nobody expected. 2 years ago, how did they do that? They pulled off, went to the playoffs, and nobody expected anything, and won a game. Like, wow, this is amazing. They're ahead of the schedule. And then last year, they plummeted just as quickly as the ascent. However, they had a lot, as you know, working against them, a ton of injuries. Not only Daniel Jones, they're all pretty much half their offensive line. Saquon was hurt. Of course, he's now gone, but just meaning, they also had a pretty bad spell of poor luck last year. All that comes back, and they have a decent draft core. They could be, back to at least, threatening for a wild card spot.
I'll take it. I was actually very, very overwhelmed and happy to see Malik Neighbors getting picked. That was my pick. I was really hoping that we would get him. I was going to be happy actually with him or Odunze. All my friends, including my brother back home, Roger, was saying just simply, if you take a look at the text thread between him and I, he just types JJ before the pick came in, and I said, if it's JJ, I riot. Yeah. I'm not ready to change quarterbacks right now. When you get a chance to take a talent like Malik Neighbors, you make that pick right there. A clear need. Their wide receiving core is really kind of just abandoned at this point. Look, I understand the New York Giants have a lot of problems, but Neighbors was the right pick. I'm very happy with that pick. We're going to move on. The North Carolina product, Drake May, was next, and he went to the New England Patriots. A lot of pop when he was selected. I guess a lot of happy faces there. It was either that or what. There really wasn't much of a choice. Obviously, quarterback was going to be the pick there. There was some thought about drafting, taking the pick and, drafting out of that position, but no. This was the right pick in many experts' eyes. Josh, your thoughts here on what happens with the New England Patriots, who really seem to have been, in a downward spiral since the loss of Tom Brady. Thoughts here on where we're looking here with Drake May.
And keep in mind, Robert, some people quickly forget they're also entering a new era without Bill Belichick. Remains to be seen. This is their first draft, sort of in that entire new era where every link to that dynasty period is now gone. Like you mentioned, I don't know if they really had any other choice, but it's funny. I saw, of all the stuff that gets thrown out there on social media and whatnot, I saw, joke thrown out there that somehow, the Patriots managed to draft Mac Jones twice, which could have been, in fact, the case. I mean, Drake May, you talk about system quarterbacks for years. It was Texas Tech was made fun of, but then Patrick Mahomes comes along.
Exactly.
And North Carolina is sort of known for the same thing, except, Drake May, to be different compared to how he's got much size, how was known with his legs.
Right.
It just sort of scrappy guy. May's more prototypical NFL, scouting combine type of guy who's going to score real well. But nonetheless, is he really, a future franchise guy? Say they have no choice. I guess we'll find out. I think arm talent, if you watch North Carolina, they were fun to watch. He does have a laser arm and whatnot, but doesn't always translate. I'll just say, again, for this class, pretty fortunate he came out when he did. Top 3 overall is pretty ambitious. So right away, I'm not sure that we could see the Patriots make drastic improvements.
So, okay, with that being said, this one's going to challenge you, Josh. Let's see how you go here. The season win totals for the New England Patriots, 4.5. The lowest in decades. Over or under?
Yeah, given the circumstances, I think you pretty much have to lean to the under. I really do. I mean, this is pretty much a full franchise rebuild. It just really is. And 5, I would pull up their schedule and look at potential dart throws of where they could pull an upset here and there. I mean, for years they've owned the Jets, right? But again, that was Belichick era. Everything changes, and I think 5 wins would be a pretty good milestone for him.
Once again, I'm joined here by senior analyst CBS Sportsline Josh Nagel. Josh going over the total for the Chicago Bears, under for Washington, and under for New England, despite the historically low season win total that I set to them. We're halfway through after 3 quarterbacks taken. We've got 3 more to go, and here's where I'm really beginning to scratch my head. And if you aren't, well, you're just not watching. The Atlanta Falcons, Michael Penix Jr., Josh. a number of texts started to flood my cell phone when that pick came across based on what was still available and who they already had on their roster and how much money was guaranteed to Kirk Cousins. $100 million. But no, we're going to take Penix here. Thoughts?
Hey, you know what's funny, right? Penix made a lot of fans, of course, in last year's national championship playoffs. But if you follow college football for a long time, he'd been in the game forever. I mean, he started off at Indiana, and it was interesting. He's always had an injury history, which is concerning. In fact, not just something here or there, like every year, pretty significant for a player of his age, and he's an old college player. 6 years in the college system, but he's had all kinds of injuries to come back through. But Indiana showed flashes of talent, but a little erratic. Eventually goes to Washington and really grows into the system there. So much so, as you saw this past year, Washington undefeated regular season, Final Four appearance, and he really caught everyone's attention with the upset at Texas in the semifinals, where it just looked like, wow. I mean, both the system and his skills were perfect because he made quick reads, get the ball out, and you mentioned some of the other, Rome Odunze, the connection he had with him. It just seemed like, his timing was perfect. Everything was within a decent catch radius of the receiver, and he seemed extremely poised and led Washington to a lot of comeback victories. They were even reasonably competitive against Michigan, until it got away from him. So his stock went way up. But with the other guys you mentioned, it was thought that, Penix probably drift back to maybe late the first round after the quick surge. And out of nowhere, but what's funny is as soon as they announced the pick, I was like, wow, there's some curiosity there. I was thinking, well, that's a pretty good pairing with Bijan Robinson and Drake London. Wow, what a young team. It'd be fun to watch. And then it clicked on me, just like you said, wait a second. They just had Cousins, a month ago for $100 million guaranteed. But what I thought was funny is like the seeming outpour of empathy for Kirk Cousins. They didn't tell him what was going on until, an hour before the draft. Why would he care? You just guaranteed the guy $100 million at age 35. People thought it was wild 4 years ago when the Vikings guaranteed him 90. Now, 4 years later, he's 35, coming off a serious injury, and you guarantee him that kind of dough. He'll go out there and throw it. I mean, if they decide at some point, one, he's getting to the point where his age or fragility is an issue. If he gets hurt again, right. you got yourself covered. But two, of course, there's the hypothetical, what if Kirk Cousins throws 2 interceptions in the first half of game one and they start calling for Penix? I mean, that could be a nightmare. But in terms of doubling down, I was like, well, yeah, they had other areas of need or whatnot, but they decided to go in that direction anyway. Hey, it's a great player. It'd be funny if it ends up pulling off. Like, for instance, say Cousins gets hurt and Penix leads him to the playoffs. I mean, imagine that. It's like you still got yourself a great player. I mean, as widespread as the criticism has been, I think I've seen worse in the draft.
I've seen a lot worse. You're absolutely right. And I thought that, okay, so Cousins is there. I figured, all right, this is going to be a great spot. Pick up Odunze. I mean, look, there's plenty of other positions you could have went in and grabbed someone. At the time, I was actually thinking, all right, maybe a defensive player at some point. Didn't happen. So I thought, well, and of course, Knicks, we'll get to Knicks in a second. I thought Penix was going to be a good landing spot, maybe for the Raiders, maybe for Denver, or maybe second round even. So the season win total here is going to be an odd number because I don't think we're going to be actually handicapping for Penix here. But I'm just going to go ahead and put out the number anyway. 9.5 in that division for the Atlanta Falcons. Over or under?
Again, it seems like a perfect number. You got to realize a relatively weak division, right? The Panthers,
yes.
Their disastrous recent drafts and other personnel moves, they're still rebuilding. You can't expect much out of them. The Saints, somewhat marginal. You realize a division that's winnable for them against some other. And to be honest, I think they got 7 wins last year, right? That was the consistent under Arthur Smith. Now it's Raheem Morris. Given their actual talent level, does Cousins make a difference on the field? Sure. The defense was a bit leaky at times. It's just, they were so inconsistent from game to game. You didn't know what to get from Atlanta, although they were in the playoff hunt right to the very end. So if they sort of measure up to their talent on the field, I would actually lean to I don't think 10-7 is too optimistic for them. I'd lean to the over on that.
Excellent. So here we are. Obviously, it wasn't really much of a decision that you made there, based off of Penix. It's just the body of work that they currently had. Nice to know that they've got someone waiting in the wings. If anything, I probably would have at the very least even leaned even more in your favor if they picked up practically anybody else. But be that as it may, Atlanta. Why Atlanta? I still ask you why. Could have went so many other ways, but okay, fair enough. I'm sure a lot of other teams that were looking for a quarterback really said to themselves, you know what, that was That was not good, Atlanta.
And if nothing else, Robert, they said it sent the rest of the first round into a tailspin. So there was entertainment value anyway. But everyone else with your mocks sort of comfortably assuming a team will go one or two ways or whatever with the player. When Penix, like you mentioned, being picked probably at least 7-8 picks ahead of projections, that just sends everyone behind him into a tailspin. I think ultimately it led to the Raiders taking Brock Bowers. They played their okay, best player available, all out of quarterbacks. What are we going to do? And so they just had to do that. Take the top name off the board. But I think it sent some confusion across the league.
Perfect dovetail to what happened next. Minnesota realizing, wait a second, we got ourselves in a position. We need a quarterback here. They draft up because they realize if they don't, their guy is probably definitely gone. The Minnesota Vikings then end up taking Michigan's J.J. McCarthy in a move that was expected. We didn't know what quarterback was going to be taken by them, but I think this is exactly where they wanted to be. J.J. McCarthy, Minnesota Viking, Josh.
Yeah, you know what? He might be the most sort of, I'd say, ambiguous talent in this draft because I remember watching him and thinking, it's kind of funny because you accuse him sometimes of being sort of a game manager, but when he's forced to make plays, he looks pretty good. He's athletic. He's pretty accurate. However, sometimes you wonder how much faith did the Michigan staff have in them. To begin with, where you look at toward the end of last year, down the stretch, they were running the ball 80% of the
non-stop.
time. You look at Penn State, a huge game with the national title implications, like late in the year, they attempted 8 passes. With him, like how much do you trust? I guess they were trying to make a statement that they could just run over Penn State or whatever, fine. But even as you mentioned, in the national semifinals, there's times they're trailing Alabama. I mean, they had to make some plays, and he did deliver. However, his playmakers also made some huge, on the final couple of drives, they really helped him out. And I always sort of liked the guy, but I was thinking, geez, this is just really ambitious to suddenly go from a guy who was serviceable and came through in the clutch as a somewhat, I say a college player with somewhat limited exposure in terms of real crunch time. Like we know Penix, how many times was he tested in the clutch? A ton. McCarthy, we just didn't see much, and then all of a sudden he just becomes the hot prospect du jour moving up there. I guess the good news is, it said they have Darnold as a bridge quarterback in Minnesota. Just look what they did last year. They're so loaded at receiver at the likes of Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison. That even with a bunch of Josh Dobbs and Nick Mullins, they still almost made a playoff run. Like just if you have a halfway serviceable arm that can get it to these guys, Minnesota's got the playmakers on offense. But it did strike me as sort of curious, how high he ended up going because I still think. Among the unproven commodities in the draft, at quarterback, he's at the top of the list.
I don't think I like my number here, but I'm going to go ahead and share it with everyone here and yourself. I made Minnesota 6.5. How do you play 6.5 knowing J.J. McCarthy is now going to be the quarterback there?
Yeah, you know what? And I've noticed too, Robert, of numbers that we mentioned might have already had some level of impact or whatnot. But I've noticed a lot of sports books, maybe yours included, that 6.5, it's shaded in terms of people are hitting the over. It's minus 150 to lay that 6.5.
Yes.
Again, I think, just basically serviceable quarterback play could get them there. I mean, with the amount of other playmakers they have, they improve a little bit on the defense. In a division where there's some pretty decent parity overall, they could win some games. But I still like that as well. I think, the Vikings to get 7 isn't out of reach.
Okay. That's excellent. What I thought was going to be a number that I thought was set a little too low. I'm very happy to hear that you're actually siding on my side of the counter, and I actually was thinking a little bit more towards the under there. Just the division just simply got better. And a lot of these games that seem to be coin flip games, I don't think they're going to go in Minnesota's favor. I don't think that J.J. McCarthy is in the same class as the quarterbacks that we mentioned earlier. Penix, not... that was the wild card. I don't want to talk about that, but in the discussion between Williams, McCarthy, and May, it's, again, fit is everything. In the way the entire line is set, their schedule, obviously, we're going to have to see what the schedule is going to be itself, but at 6.5, I actually wanted to shade it a little bit more towards the under. The world is going over. Josh Nagel is going to go under that 6.5.
Well, you got the right side, like you said, especially if that's where that's coming from, like you mentioned, if the steam's coming based on what they did in the draft or whatnot. I mean, like you mentioned, you said a number where you're probably willing to roll the dice with your side, with what your book needs for sure.
Josh, we're almost here at the penultimate pick here. The Denver Broncos obviously are done with the Russell Wilson experiment and have moved on. They just days before the draft acquired New York Jets quarterback Zach Wilson. Couple of my friends back east said, good riddance. That was something they wanted to wash their hands of, and now it's with the Denver Broncos. But Denver goes and picks with the number 12 selection, Bo Nix from Oregon. First off, let's go ahead and talk about what the franchise looks like today. Obviously, the players that are there right now, a lot of talent on that roster. The division is a pretty loaded one. The question I guess we could begin with, much like we talked about with Atlanta, who's the starting quarterback, Josh?
Yeah, you know what, Robert, but I will say of the somewhat marginal quarterbacks, if you will, that we keep talking about that went last night, I think Bo Nix might have been the best value, if only because he went the latest and might have the highest upside. If you watched Oregon last year, it was interesting because Nix was a highly touted prospect when he first joined college, and that was at Auburn. Was there a couple years, and he was okay in spots, but he drove, I know, their fan base nuts. He could be erratic. He'd be having a great game and throw the game losing interception, and he ends up at Oregon. And I think a lot of people lost track of him for a little while. Then suddenly he comes up with a great final year there, but he was pretty decent the year before too. And you talk about a system that allowed him to excel. If you watched Oregon late last year, a lot of people thought they were flat invincible. Like, hey, they were going to the Final Four no matter what.
For sure.
It looked like he was in rhythm. Like every single time they had a drive going, he threw it on time, seemed like somebody was always open. He never made the wrong throw, and he's got underrated legs. He started making plays with his legs where I heard the coaching staff actually asked him to once in a while instead of just constantly trying to make the heroic play with your arm. You see an opening, take it, and he did. And it seemed like he was an overwhelming favorite to win the Heisman until they met Washington in the Pac-12 title game. Unfortunately, he had a bit of a bad game there. The whole world watching, which allowed Jane Daniels to take the Heisman, sort of by default. But then he bounced back in an era where a lot of the top-ranked players just sit out, bowl games or whatnot in preparation, for the draft. He went out and actually played Oregon's bowl game against Liberty. Had another amazing performance. I just think overall, wire to wire, he was the most efficient quarterback probably in the country. They say Sean Payton, I'll never know why he thinks soured so quickly with Russ. I guess mostly it was the contract issue where they wanted him to restructure, and he's like, no, I signed him. I can't believe the amount of the hit they absorbed by just completely parting ways with Russell Wilson to start over. But in terms of Sean Payton's history, if you look at Drew Brees and whatnot, he likes that style of quarterback who processes quickly, gets the ball out, and sort of makes the effective play, keeps the chains moving. And Bo Nix was that. So a lot of people are kind of down on that. I think for the situation they were up against, the Broncos did as well as they could have.
So with that being said, and obviously the positions that they're in, their season win total, obviously, all things considered, everything that Josh just mentioned right now, their season win total is 5.5, Josh. Pretty darn low for a Denver franchise that's not used to seeing a number that low. How would you play that number from a season win total perspective?
Yeah, from a season win total perspective, again, when you look at last year, too, the Broncos had what was almost a historically disastrous start, right? They were the laughing stock of the league. A 70-20 loss to the Dolphins. I thought, oh, this is the worst team in the NFL. Then they went on at one point to win 6 or 7 in a row, beat Buffalo on the road. They had some respectability. So I think those who were so quick to write off, Sean Payton's reputation is just sort of, finding the right combination in New Orleans and his longevity, and he won 1 Super Bowl. I guess what I'm saying is there's a sentiment now that, he might be overrated. I still think, they pulled some respectability out of the fire last year, and there's a lot of, variables with this one, but I think if Bo Nix is halfway decent, which I think it will be, I think they could go over that. I think it is funny, though, when you're looking at, Bo Nix, or as you mentioned, Zach Wilson. Whoever starts on opening day, say if it's Zach Wilson, I take it back. However, like I said, to me, that feels like a little bit low-hanging fruit. I have enough, confidence in Sean Payton. Like you mentioned, the other personnel, they still have a decent backfield, a defense that came alive. I think they could be respectable.
So, and of course, with that being said, as we all know, we're listening here today at the conclusion of round 1. We haven't seen anything from round 2 and beyond. Much more can be done to increase the depth of every roster. And this would actually probably would even affect the season win totals because, look, after all, it's still the end of April. So much more could still happen between now and then. But really, really happy that Josh joined me here today for this episode. Of course, if you liked what you just heard and watched, thanks so much. Don't forget to like and subscribe us as we're constantly looking to add far, far more to what we have here on our table of buffet items. And so as we thought way back at the end of the Super Bowl where, oh boy, what are we going to talk about? There's no more football to talk about. There's always football to talk about. But of course, as we all know, we're deep in the heart of the NBA playoffs. The Stanley Cup finals are just weeks away. Major League Baseball's, of course, deep into its seasons. And, well, we could talk a little bit about the Chicago White Sox if we want to, and or maybe not, based on how bad they've been looking. But there's obviously so much from a betting perspective. The sports are always on, and we're really glad that you're sticking around and listening in. Thank you so much for everybody. Josh, I know where I could find you, of course, but where can everyone else find you on the socials for all the information that you just gave us?
No, again, Robert, I appreciate the invitation. You're right. It can be found at sportsline.com if you want to check out the website, but we also have a whole branch of podcasts, called the Early Edge family, where we have like sports-specific, episodes for anything you're into. We have one focuses on just golf or just football, whatever you're looking for, all for free on YouTube. Or subscriptions, just $10 a month for Sportsline, but we run promos all the time at 0.5% or 50% or more off regularly, so you can pay attention to that. But sportsline.com is where you can get started to find everything. For Josh Nagel, I'm your host, Robert Kowalski. Thank you again so much for joining us today. See you again next episode.
Thank you for listening to The Bookie and the Better Show. New episodes post every Thursday on your favorite streaming service.